The SEC and the Big Ten have separated themselves from the rest of college football. Would they break away from the NCAA? That'd be a bad idea.
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This is your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth. Realignment, coaching carousel, and the portal. We've got you covered. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Talk about the big two conferences in college football, Missouri and their high hopes going into 2024, and three dark horse college football playoff contenders for 2024, all coming up on today's show. But we start with the Big Ten and the SEC, who it has been discussed on more than one occasion, on more than one show, or by more than one reporter about the possibility of would they break away from the NCAA? Could they go and just be their own entity and just get rid of the NCAA? That's a bad idea for a couple of reasons. Number one, does the NCAA play a critical role in college football? No, they do not. But can the Big Ten and the SEC on their own form the same competitive product that they have with the rest of college football? Can you draw the same sort of national intrigue? I'd argue they cannot. Because the Big Ten and the SEC, yeah, they get the biggest viewership on their games. But do you know what really draws in all the attention and the national spectacle? It's that other conferences have a shot. And yeah, the Big 12 and the ACC are looking up at the Big 10 and the SEC right now. But if those two conferences on their own existed outside of the NCAA, first of all, they would have to find a governing structure for the rest of their sports beyond football. That sounds rather difficult and not something that I'd imagine Big Ten or SEC schools are interested in. The talk about the NCAA being, reduced in its capacity and not being as relevant, I agree with all of that because I'm watching the legal cases play out, so I'm not going to sit here and ignore facts. But I don't know that the solution is to just move off and form something that is your own, rather than to work within the framework of what you have. Perfect example, the Live Golf League. I'm a huge golf fan. Any of you golfers out there, by all means, let me know. I would love to talk golf with people because I am always about it. But playing, watching, discussing it, I'm always talking about golf and such, or thinking about golf. The Live Golf League broke away, and it sounded like such a great idea. Oh my gosh, you just need some starts. You just need the best players. And then what exactly has Live Golf done as a television product to make you, the average sports fan, tune into it? To give it pedigree, to give it legitimacy, to give it viewership, to allow it to make any money. As of now, it's just a sunk cost for the PIF for their own personal reasons. And so when I think about that, it relates, in my mind, to what the Big Ten and the SEC have. Well, we've got more money, we can do this. But if you don't have the tie to everybody else, you lose your appeal. You absolutely do. And you can go and play in this Super League and have this money and break away. You can choose to do all that sort of stuff. It's not going to have the outcome that you think. Because eventually, a league that only consists, or a sport that only consists of the Big Ten and the SEC, it's going to feel small. It's going to feel unimportant. It's going to feel far too regional. So I don't foresee this being a move that the Big Ten and the SEC want to make for those reasons. And think about this. The Big Ten and the SEC have thrived in realignment. Texas and Oklahoma, biggest brands, biggest television products with the biggest game in the Big 12. We'll take that. All of it. The Los Angeles television market, biggest or second biggest in the country in the Pac-12. The Big Ten will take that too. Oh, by the way, your best recruiting team out west and the team to last go to the national championship, we'll take all of that too. If the Big Ten and the SEC want to continue to grow their power and influence, you can't look at the number of schools that are in the Big 12 and the SEC and just leave them behind. You have to bring them along for the ride and also make it clear, as they have done with their realignment moves, that they are in charge, that they are the conferences everyone is going to look at. So breaking away and just saying, no, we're not going to play in the same sport as the schools in the Big 12 or the ACC. Well, that just fractures the entire sport. What appeal do most college football fans have to a league that is being played in which their team is not in any way involved in it? Yeah, you can talk about making a super league and all this sort of stuff, and it sounds kind of great. I mean, I think it sounds terrible personally, but guess what? At some point, you have to have the cross-conference, cross-country appeal. That's why you had things like the ABA and the NBA merger, because you need to have everybody playing in the same sort of spot. You can still establish dominance. You can still make it clear that you are the financial and influential power in the sport and in the entire country, but breaking away from everybody else doesn't allow you to accomplish that. And here's the other thing. What helps feed the perception that the Big Ten and the SEC, correctly, are the two best leagues in the country? That they keep getting the best schools from the other conferences. The move isn't to break away from the NCAA. The move is to keep making realignment moves. And look, the Big Ten and the SEC can stand pat for a long time. They don't have to go anywhere. They don't have to do anything. They can just sit with what they have made, or they can choose to add even further. And maybe once you get enough teams, you could say, well, we don't have to have X, Y, and Z team behind. Okay, but at that point in time, you're essentially just making a modified version of college football in which you've got everybody involved, in which you have fan bases from all over the country. And so whether or not they would, and then again, there's the administration for all the other sports. Who's going to run that sort of stuff? Who's going to run your championships? Just the conferences? I mean, okay, sure. But you're only going to play against teams that are in the Big Ten and the SEC? Until you have, there's a number of schools that you would have to get to. You could certainly leave some behind and make this work, but I don't think they are at that critical threshold just yet. They could get there, but they would have to add a lot more schools. They would have to add probably around half the Big 12 and maybe the top half or so of the ACC. Then you could say we could play our own sport and we could just break away from the NCAA and everything, but that is not what I would like to see happen. Because there's been enough ground-altering change and just radical shifts in college football. Let's just get to the product on the field. And let's understand, the Big Ten, the SEC are bigger and better than the other conferences in America. And that's the way that it is. But part of the reason the SEC has been dominant for a long time. You know why fans on the West Coast or on the East Coast or in the northern part of the country have remained engaged? Because they have a chance to go after them. What if the SEC, when they were the best conference in college football, which they have been for a very long time, decide, we're just going to play SEC schools, forget everybody else? Well, would that have made everything the same? Would it feel as big to you down there in the SEC? No, you can't flex your muscle as a conference or as a team or as a league unless you are actually competing against somebody else. That's what makes it interesting. That's what makes it exciting. And that's why I don't think the Big Ten and the SEC will break away from the NCAA. Are they done in realignment? No. I've argued that on this show before, and I continue to believe they'll make more moves in the future. But have they reached the critical threshold to where they can just be their own sport entirely? No, I do not think that is the case. I do think Missouri's really interesting because Missouri just kind of bursts on the scene out of nowhere, seemingly last year, and they won 11 games, beat Ohio State in a New Year's Six bowl game. Boy. Did you have that on your bingo card last year? I certainly didn't. What's their follow-up act going to be? You should follow up watching or listening to this show by going to check out Game Time. Why? Well, because Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. Game Time thinks you shouldn't have to worry when you buy tickets to your next big event. I tend to agree, hence why I recommend them. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Game Time is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. You see the view from your seat before you arrive, so you know what to expect. You get all-in prices when you're buying, so you know what you're getting before you check out, and it's a great deal, and you can buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Is Missouri going to live up to the high hopes after an 11-2 2023 season? Well, they've kind of got the schedule to do it, which we'll get to. John Miller of Locked On Mizzou joining me here on Locked On College Football. And John, I don't know that expectations have been this high in Missouri in quite some time after they burst onto the scene last year. Eli Drinkwitz gets the big extension, and there are just a lot of high hopes over there with the Tigers going into this season. Spring football has gotten underway. What priorities do they need to be focused on to reach their goals in 2024?
You know, I think on the defensive side of the ball, I'm going to start with cornerback. I think that's one of the biggest strengths from Missouri and their defense the past couple of years. Chris Abrams-Drain, Ennis Rakestraw, a couple guys who maybe day one or two type selections. I'd say Abrams-Drain, you know, both of those guys probably first couple, 3 rounds. So that allowed Missouri to be really aggressive, play a lot of man-to-man on the outside. Are they going to be able to do that this season? New defensive coordinator, Blake Baker, moved on to LSU. So there's a few question marks defensively, but for the most part, I think we're fine there. If anything, I'm more worried about special teams. New place kicker. Punter was a question last year, still a bit of a question, and really Missouri's special teams have been up and down under Drinkwitz. Those are my biggest questions.
And kicker, of course, you can't overlook that. Their marquee win early in the season against Kansas State. Who could forget the 61-yarder? I mean, absolute nails. So as spring football gets underway, what about what they've done this offseason? Are there new pieces that are going to be integral to their success in 2024? And who are those names that people need to know when you think about, well, you know, how is Missouri going to have another double-digit win season?
Well, since I mentioned corner, one of the first guys is Toriano Pride, a guy, a transfer from Clemson. He's from East St. Louis, so Missouri was really on him out of high school. Well, eventually that relationship has paid some dividends a couple years later. But one guy to really look for is Caden Green, offensive lineman from Oklahoma this past season. He was a true freshman, I believe, at Oklahoma, played virtually every snap for the Sooners at left guard, played a little bit left tackle too. Missouri's going to probably plug him in at left tackle. They've got a couple spots, left tackle and one of the guard spots to fill in as well. But I really expect that Missouri's offensive line is going to be pretty good again. Again, it's nice to not only be able to take a nice offensive lineman from the portal, add him to your roster, but also at the expense of one of your opponents next season in the Oklahoma Sooners.
Yeah, Oklahoma will travel to Missouri in a classic SEC battle, if I've ever heard one.
Oh, yeah, just all the way back 50 years
I know,
ago.
the history goes it goes back to before I was born, John,
I'm
last time I checked.
Can't you hear it now? Yeah.
I can indeed. But the returners on this Missouri team, look, there are not many teams, not just in the SEC, but in all of college football, that can say they return their head coach and their quarterback from last year's team. You look around the SEC, Georgia can say that, Ole Miss can say that, but teams like Alabama cannot, Texas A&M cannot, LSU cannot, Auburn don't know what's going to happen to the quarterback position down there. Maybe they can, but that's one of the reasons that I feel good about Missouri going into this season. Is you've got the same offensive system, you've got Brady Cook back, you've got Luther Burden at wide receiver, a good recruiting class and a good portal class coming in this year for the Tigers. How important is it to have that continuity for this Missouri team as they look to make an SEC championship game?
Oh, I think it means everything. I think you see it in this sport over and over again, especially on the offensive side of the ball. Man, if you have an experienced quarterback, and now Brady Cook, obviously by far his best season last year, this will now be his 3rd year as a starter, also his 5th year in the program with Eli Drinkwitz the entire time. So he knows what's expected of him. He now has gone from a guy the previous offseason for a big portion of the fan base was kind of a punching punching bag. Now he's the big man on campus, and everybody loves the guy all of a sudden. And the good news is I think Brady Cook is the kind of young man who's very level-headed and grounded. He's not going to let any of that bother him in a negative way. I think it's all good there. Not worried about him whatsoever. And to your point, Missouri has a ton of continuity at the receiver position too. All four, I think, of their top receivers are back. You're talking about not only Luther Burden, but Theo Weiss, hey, another Oklahoma transfer from last season. Also, Mookie Cooper decided to come back, real speedster slot type player. And then I really think Marquise Johnson, who to me had the key deep pass that finally opened up the Cotton Bowl offensively for Missouri, also had a key plays in other parts of the game, including a fake punt against Kentucky that turned that game around too. Watch for Marquise Johnson. I mean, I don't think there's a team in the country that has four receivers that I'd be any more confident in than the Tigers right now.
Yeah, I like what they've got back offensively, and the combination of talent, experience, and continuity is a hard one. A lot of places have talent and experience, but they haven't all played together. And you can even look at some of the best rosters in all of college football and find that to be the case. But just before we get to Missouri's schedule and why it works out so favorably, perhaps factoring into why their win total is 9.5. I mean, this is Missouri football we're talking about here. As someone who doesn't have a great history of being a fan in the SEC, well, I'm not a fan of the SEC. I've been watching the SEC, of course, for a long time because I'm a college football fan, but Missouri football has been off a lot of people's national radar for quite a while, but they burst onto the scene last year. What is the mood and the vibe around the program right now?
Oh, it's the most hype I've seen for an offseason in at least 10 years. Missouri did make an SEC championship appearance, actually 2 in a row in 2013 and 2014. So certainly between those two seasons, massive hype the next year as well. So, I mean, it's been a good decade since then of Missouri, wanting to just kind of turn it around. And finally, it seems like we're getting there in the post-Gary Pinkel era. So it'll be interesting. Hopefully we'll get some nice weather for the spring game coming up here in a couple weeks, get a big crowd. But, Missouri is never going to have 75,000 people for the spring game like Georgia or something like that. But I promise you, when the games kick off next year, it's going to be sellout every single game as long as everything just goes reasonably well.
And the schedule sets up for that to be the case for Eli Drinkowitz and company. So there is no LSU on this schedule for Missouri. That's just one of several breaks that they've got. I'll run through the 12 games Missouri's got on the docket, and you'll understand why. With all the returning experience and everything we've talked about, their win total's 9.5, according to our friends at FanDuel. Murray State, Buffalo, Boston College, Vanderbilt. Those are 4 games at home. Those should all be wins. At Texas A&M on October 5th. Come back home, host UMass. That's a win. October 19th against Auburn at home. At Alabama, host Oklahoma. And then close with South Carolina and Mississippi State on the road and hosting Arkansas. I see 2 games on here where Missouri isn't going to be the favorite, John. I think 10-11 wins could be in the cards for the Tigers this year if all goes according to plan.
It's definitely on the table. There's no doubt about it. Heck, Missouri's over-under last season was 6.5, and they raced by that quite easily. Now, of course, every year's different. The expectations are so much higher for Missouri this season. But I'm with you. I think the word I would use to describe that schedule is navigable. It's not easy. I wouldn't say it's easy because no SEC schedule is easy. You're having to go to Tuscaloosa. Listen, I know Oklahoma's maybe not what they were thought of during the Lincoln Riley era, but that's still an incredibly formidable program. Auburn, who knows? Maybe year 2 of Hugh Freeze. Maybe they
Auburn
start
should
to
be
figure
solid.
it out a little more. Who the heck knows with Auburn? Let's be honest. They can be up here or they can be down here. Every once in a while they win the national title, but more often than not you're scratching your head. So maybe this is one of the good years for Auburn, just for example. So
yeah,
not a cakewalk by any means, but obviously, as you said, Missouri avoids LSU. They avoid Georgia. Kentucky
and they avoid
is always a tricky game.
Yep, Kentucky. They avoid Texas
too,
as well. So no Georgia, no LSU,
no doubt,
and no Texas.
Yes,
those are things that I look at it from an SEC scheduling standpoint and say, boy, it does not get a whole heck of a lot better than that.
It fell nicely for Missouri, but I will say, if it does come down to, say, some, three-way tie for a spot in the SEC title game, that could potentially backfire on Missouri, because, say, Missouri has one loss, Georgia has one loss, Texas has one loss. Well, the winner of that game, if they play each other, there's a mutual opponent. I actually don't have I'm just trying to give an example here. Well, then Missouri wouldn't have a mutual opponent, and therefore they would get left out. So there is a slight downside to this schedule, but again, just from a perspective of, hey, our friends over at FanDuel, maybe you want to put some action on it, 9.5, yeah, it's navigable. It really is.
John Miller, Locked On Missouri. You can catch him on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Locked On Mizzou, Mizzou. John, thanks so much for stopping by.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Spencer.
Coming up next, 3 dark horse teams to make the college football playoff in 2024, all over the country. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy and gets a team to the playoff, as we'll discuss, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. I've got 3 teams that you should think of as dark horse college football playoff contenders in 2024. Why? Because here's something to remember with the playoff. It's 12 teams in 2024 and in 2025. But don't let all this talk about the 2026 number of auto bids confuse you. There are just 4 automatic bids. Well, 5 with the group of 5 champion. But amongst the Power 4 schools, there are 11 spots. Only 4 of them are guaranteed. There are going to be 7 at-large teams whose resumes are judged just like the other teams used to be. Let's start with Iowa. Let's start with the Iowa Hawkeyes, a team that has become known for punting. Yeah, it's not exactly flashy. That's not attractive, but Iowa has got consistently one of the best defenses, not just in the Big Ten, in all of college football. Their defense, quite literally, is championship caliber. If you took Iowa's defense and you put it with Lincoln Riley's offenses at USC the last 2 years, USC makes no fewer than probably 2 playoff appearances in those 2 seasons. They make at least 1. They may very well make 2. So this is not something in which Iowa has a long way to go in order to reach. They don't have to make drastic changes for the entire program. They just need to fix their offense. In the same way that I talk about USC just needing to be competent on defense, Iowa just needs to be competent on offense, and not everyone's really scoring on them. So they bring in a new offensive coordinator, Tim Lester. He was an analyst with the Green Bay Packers. He's got a tall task in front of him. Does he have the personnel? We're going to see. We'll see if Iowa's got the personnel offensively. Here's what we do know. They should have, barring obstruction in his recovery, Cade McNamara at quarterback. He announced back in October that he was going to return for his senior season with the black and gold. Said he had unfinished business as the Hawkeyes quarterback. And, well, he didn't get to finish last season. It wasn't incredibly aesthetically pleasing for those of us who like offense in college football. But is Cade McNamara better than the revolving door quarterbacks they had over the last half of the season? Yeah, I think so. So if you can, with a better offensive coordinator, and let's be real, Brian Ferentz has set the bar quite low for the Hawkeyes. If you can get Cade McNamara healthy for 12 games, tell me how difficult this schedule is. Rank it in your head on a scale of 1 to 10. The first 4 games are all at home. The first 3 games are all at home. Illinois State, Iowa State, and Troy. Iowa's going to be favored in every single one of those games. Okay, then they start Big Ten play at Minnesota. Could be worse. They go at Ohio State. All right, they're going to lose that football game. Then they host Washington, at Michigan State, Northwestern, which had a great first year under David Braun, Wisconsin at home. Don't have to go to Madison. Get Wisconsin at home, at UCLA, who's in a complete and total rebuild under their new head coach. But then they end with Maryland on the road and hosting Nebraska. Does that sound like a brutal schedule to you? What I'm looking for in a dark horse 12-team at-large playoff contender, which Iowa absolutely is, can you get to double-digit wins? That's going to put you in the mix, no matter what conference you're in. ACC, Big 12, certainly in the Big 10, but Big 12, Big 10, SEC, ACC, Big 12. I said Big 12 too many times. I'll stop now. But if you're in that range, if you have got 10 wins, you can be in that conversation. There will be a discussion. You'll get mentioned. You'll pop up on graphics on ESPN at the very least. That schedule, pretty darn manageable. I think that Ohio State on the road is the only game I look at and say it's a guaranteed loss for Iowa. Their win total is only 7.5 on FanDuel. I think that's a little bit low. Let's go over to the Big 12. I've got 2 teams in there. Let's start with Texas Tech. You want to talk about favorable schedules? Texas Tech is so primed, so very primed under Joey McGuire to make a leap here because he has had a solid tenure so far as the head coach in Lubbock. He's got Baron Morton, one of the highest rated quarterback recruits ever for the Red Raiders, to roll through, who got experience last year after Tyler Shuck went down with an injury. So he comes into a situation in which he's a young quarterback that has a lot of potential, but he doesn't have to learn it all on the fly. He's got real in-game experience, has shown production in that time as well. This is the Texas Tech schedule. Oh boy, you want to talk favorable? How about 4 of your first 5 games being played at home? When the tortillas are flying, teams generally tend to lose. Remember, Oregon went into Lubbock last year and should have lost the game. Not could have, they should have lost the game. They squeaked it out. And Oregon was a playoff caliber team. Texas Tech, when Tyler Shuck was healthy and they were getting more consistent quarterback play, they were a good team. And they can be a good team again this year. So they open with Abilene Christian. That's an FCS game. They'll be fine. Week 2, don't sleep on going to Pullman. They don't go to Autzen. They were going to go to Oregon, but the Ducks want to play the Beavers, so that leaves the Red Raiders to play the Cougars in the Pac-12. So Washington State in Pullman, that's a tough place to play. That's a tough place to play. Then they come back home for 3 straight. North Texas, Arizona State, Cincinnati. Texas Tech will be favored in, wait for it, 1, 2, 3 of those games. Well, that's 4 wins that I can see right there pretty easily in their first 5 games. It gets tougher. They go at Arizona. They host Baylor. A lot of pressure in Waco, by the way, on Dave Aranda and company, but they hired a Jake Spavital from Cal as the offense coordinator. Could be a good move. Good enough to go into Lubbock and get a win? Boy, we'll find out. We will find out. At TCU and then at Iowa State, if you can win one of those games at least, you'll be in pretty good shape. I think they could win both. Host Colorado. Big to have Colorado at home. Do you want to go into Boulder? Probably not. At Oklahoma State, that's a toughie, but they get it off a bye. So you go Colorado at home, bye week, then at Oklahoma State, and close with West Virginia. Is that schedule so horrifically bad that it's out of the realm of possibility that Texas Tech, who was a 7-6 team last year, that's got a promising quarterback that returns their head coach and has made some nice portal moves in the offseason, really on both sides of the ball, is it out of the realm of possibility they could get to 10? No. And remember, we're talking dark horse candidates. Texas Tech belongs in that discussion. I think their win total on FanDuel, I think it's a little bit low, just like a tad low. Maybe it's about right. Maybe you can talk me into it's about right. But 7.5, boy, I would lean the over because I think between Washington State, Arizona, TCU, and Oklahoma State, those are all road games. You're probably losing at least 1, certainly. 2 is the most likely outcome. But do I think they're going to lose all 3 of those 4 games? I don't think so. I do not think so. I like Texas Tech's schedule, and I like Joey McGuire too. With Baron Morton a quarterback, I think the Red Raiders could be a dark horse contender in there. Finally, how about the man who got a nice extension, or rather a raise, this offseason out there in Lawrence, and that's Lance Leipold and the Kansas Jayhawks. Who's Kansas's quarterback? It's Jalen Daniels. Still? He's still there. Yes, I am here to tell you, Jalen Daniels is still Kansas's quarterback. So when you look at the quarterbacks in the Big 12 next year, and you say, well, who are the best ones? you're certainly going to start with some combination of Shedeur Sanders, Cam Rising, Noah Fafita. Where are you going after that? You're probably looking at Jalen Daniels. How often does a quarterback who is top 4 or 5 in his conference, in a 16-team conference, mind you, with a head coach that is returning, not succeed in at least a solid amount? I don't think it happens very often. Kansas's regular season win total is one higher than Texas Tech. I think that the Jayhawks and the Red Raiders and the Hawkeyes, I think these are all teams that I'm not expecting them to get to the playoff. I'm just saying, would I write them off? Would I look at these teams and say, they're not going to the playoff? That could never happen. No, I see a path. I see a path because of the quarterback situations they've got. I see a path because of the teams that they had last year and the fact that their head coaches are all back. And look, in the wild world of the coaching carousel, it's not always a guarantee that your coach comes back for another season when the last one was a good season and you're not at a traditional power. But obviously Kirk Ferentz is not going to leave Iowa until they drag him away kicking and screaming. Lance Leipold gets a raise to stay at Kansas for at least one more year, and the Jayhawks have got a lot of things working in their favor. And then Texas Tech is trying to build something there in Lubbock. And in the new look Big 12, the opportunity is there to stack up wins. And I'll make this declaration right now. Between Kansas, Iowa, or Texas Tech, at least one of those teams will win 10 regular season games next year. Just you watch. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.